Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. We had a little technical issues, but we are all smooth sailing now. Thank you so much for attending live our last of the DOT series, Vehicle Maintenance and Safety Management Scores. We are joined here by Ken Alderden, who has been doing all of these webinars. It's been amazing to just hear his approach as well as just how much educational knowledge he has. Just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So this webinar is recorded, so you can view it after the webinar is live, as well as share it with people who are interested in learning more about the DOT series. This also will come with a copy of the slides sent to you via email, as well as a link to that recording. If you have any questions during the webinar, you're welcome to put them into the chat or the Q&A feature on Zoom, and Ken will answer them. We're thinking that this webinar will be a little bit shorter, so we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So if there's anything you'd like to ask from our 101, 102, and this 103 as well, you're welcome to ask Ken during the webinar. Without further ado, I will introduce Ken. Ken joined Hausman Group in 2022 with over 30 years of experience in the insurance safety field. He has both worked on the carrier and the agency side, which gives him a unique perspective into the ins and outs of safety at companies both large and small. Ken focuses on construction safety in particular, working with clients on fleet safety, FMCA issues, and large property fire protection. Thank you, Ken, so much for being here, and welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for everybody's time today. As I mentioned, this is going to be a little bit shorter version of this presentation. I think the last ones I was rushing to get through in an hour, but I do have a little less to cover in this one. That said, we'll go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start with a quick recap of some of the inter and intrastate regulations that we had talked about previously. We talked about vehicle maintenance files today, the annual inspection requirements. Spend a fair amount of time on pre-trip and post-trip, as well as the safety management scores for your company's DOT number. And we'll talk about some of the kind of low-hanging fruit, I guess, on parts 393 and 396. We certainly don't have time to go into all of that because that's a lot of information. But without any further ado, we're going to kick right in here. So just as a recap, if you hear me say anything about interstate or intrastate, we're talking about whether or not your vehicles are leaving the state of Wisconsin. I know you can be intrastate in any state, but we focus on Wisconsin regulations as most of our clients here are based in Wisconsin. For this particular presentation, there's actually not a whole lot of difference here, but if you're crossing the state line, you are an interstate carrier. And then the other two terms that you'll hear me throw out here are CMV or CDL vehicles, and that all really has to do with the weight of your vehicles. Pretty much everything we're going to talk about today is CMV, so it kicks in at 10,000 pounds or greater. I should say not 10,000, it kicks in at 10,001 pounds or greater, so greater than 10,000 pounds. And that's inclusive of your vehicle and trailer. So a lot of your half-ton pickups have a 7,000 pound gross vehicle weight rating. If you put a relatively small trailer on the back of that, that has, my particular truck is a 7,100 and my trailer is a 2,995. If you add those two together, it comes out at just under 10,100 pounds. That would be a commercial motor vehicle. If I was pulling my trailer for the furtherance of a business, that would become a commercial motor vehicle. I would have to meet all the requirements for parts 393 and 396 that we're talking about today. Nothing in this presentation really gets into CDL weight, but that would be when your vehicle is over 26,000 pounds. So I'm going to ask this hypothetically here. You don't have to raise your hand and answer, but I want you to think about who is the best person to find a defect when you find something wrong with a vehicle. It can be your driver during their pre-trip inspection in the morning, your driver doing their post-trip inspection at the end of the day. Could be your mechanic when he just happens to be doing some routine maintenance on say, an oil change. Could be your annual inspection that's done by your commercial motor vehicle inspector that does your annual DOT inspections. Could be somebody like myself that's coming out and visiting your job sites and notices that you have a bald tire. Or I think we could all agree the worst one is probably the State Patrol when they have you pulled over doing an inspection of your vehicle. Obviously, the answer that most of you probably came up with should have been the first two on there, and I'll give you credit for either of those two answers. Your driver is the one that should be finding these things. And if there's something wrong with your vehicle, whether they find it at a pre-trip or a post-trip, I think both can be the correct answer, because your pre-trip, in theory, doesn't find anything that your post-trip shouldn't have had the night before. Same token, you might have had some things though that you were driving your vehicle all day and you notice that there's a new shake in the wheel or some vibration that you didn't notice, or the brakes are starting to squeal. So I think either a pre-trip or a post-trip inspection is the answer that we're looking for here. And if you're not seeing your drivers come to you with issues, I question whether or not they're doing as thorough of a job as they need to do in their pre-trip and their post-trip inspection. So we will be talking about those two items in more detail. So Part 396 gets into the inspections and maintenance of your vehicles. It applies to, again, all vehicles that are over 10,000 pounds for either inter or intrastate regulations. There's no difference here. There's only one minor difference for what the state of Wisconsin adopts, and that has to do with how many axles your vehicle has to have brakes on. Again, and it's based on older vehicles, so I don't think we have a lot of those on the road here. So again, in theory, pretty much everything the federal government tells you to do, the state of Wisconsin also tells you to do when it comes to inspections and maintenance. What it also tells you is that every motor carrier, its officers, drivers, agents, representatives, and employees that are concerned with the inspection or maintenance must be knowledgeable of and comply with all of the rules of this part. So again, your drivers are responsible for knowing what they should be looking for. They should know how to do a good pre-trip inspection. They should know how to make sure their paperwork is in order before they hit the road. And it's amazing how many times you see certain minor things, like they didn't know they had an annual inspection sticker on their vehicles. When they were asked for it, they couldn't produce it. And here's their stickers right in the door that they probably been looking at every day they got in the vehicle. So again, gets into a lot of different issues, but for the most part, we're talking about making sure that your drivers understand what they're supposed to do, as well as really, again, you could have maintenance people or officers or purchasing people alike. There's other people involved in this process. Any vehicle that in your control for more than 30 days has to have a vehicle maintenance file. We'll talk about what's in those in a second, but again, anything that you have in your control for more than 30 days, you have to have a vehicle maintenance file. If you're just buying something to resell, that's not the case. But if you are purchasing a vehicle, you expect it to be in your possession for more than 30 days, you need to have full driver files on all of that. It actually doesn't say that you have to have it. It says that the motor carrier, which we'll call the employer here as well, must maintain or cause to maintain. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that you can't outsource this. However, if you keep reading, I will always caution people that if you're thinking that Enterprise is keeping your driver files for you, or that you're using the local dealer and they have all the paperwork that you would need should you need to prove this, you may be wrong. They need to make sure that everything is there. So again, if you can confirm that they're doing everything on the next slide that we're going to ask you to do, you may be able to allow your third-party vendor here to do that for you. But that last little bullet point there, it does say that the motor carrier is solely responsible for ensuring that all vehicles under your control are in a safe operating condition and then any defects have been corrected. So a lot of this still falls back on you. And if you said, well, my mechanic should have told me that I needed new tires, that doesn't cut it. You are still the one that's going to get the citation for that. So again, outsourcing these things for annual inspection stickers and some of those things is very common. But again, I think a driver file is still something that all companies need to make sure they have in place. So what needs to be in your driver file? Well, for starters, let's talk about how you have to identify them. Because when I do mock DOT inspections of some of the companies that have asked us to come in, some of the things are relatively minor, but your vehicle, your folders rather, need to be marked with a company number. If it's truck 35 in your fleet, it needs to be on there so that we can quickly identify which folder we're supposed to be looking for. It should have the year, make, and serial number, or the VIN number of the vehicle identified. It's supposed to have the tire size, and then again, if it's not owned by you, if there's a leasing company or somebody on there that whose vehicle it's owned by, should be also listed. That's just kind of the easy stuff, right? That's the tab that's on the top of the folder on the outside of the cover. What's inside of it's the important part. Means to identify everything that you do to it. the nature and the date of any kind of inspections or maintenance operations that are performed. So again, anything that you're doing to fix one of these vehicles should be a record of that should be kept. Should have a record of the inspection that's done, any kind of repairs, maintenance, their nature and the date, and any tests that are conducted. Again, I don't think I have school buses, but the bottom one kind of gets into the push out windows and things that are required on school buses. So that's your maintenance files. Again, it needs to have a record of everything you do to your vehicles, and you should have those in your possession for the life of the vehicle. Plus, again, I caution people on throwing that stuff away until the vehicle's gone. But annual inspections. The annual inspection is required on any DOT vehicle. So again, I'll go back to my half-ton pickup with the trailer behind it. Those two vehicles in separation are not DOT vehicles, and I wouldn't need a DOT inspection on it. But if I'm driving down the road with my 31 or 3,000 pound trailer behind my 7,100 pound truck, both of those need to have an annual inspection done with them, as well as, again, any vehicle that's over 10,000 on its own. Should have an inspection report prepared again with Part 396 in mind. You can use either the full report, or you can have some type of sticker or decal that's applied to the vehicle, as long as it indicates the date of the inspection, the name of the motor carrier, and then again, how do we identify this truck 35, GMC, or whatever vehicle. It should have some type of identifier on it so that we know it's not just a generic 2024 sticker that every driver has, and they pull it out when they need to prove that they passed one. This is one of those things, again, I think the drivers need to understand where that sticker is, and they should be checking that regularly to make sure that it's still legible as well. A couple suggestions: make sure that you have a system to track when they expire. If you send every vehicle in on its same date every year, in the month of January, you get them all ready for the construction season in March. That's acceptable, but again, if you have a system that says every vehicle comes up at a random time, you can make sure that you don't have them that are slipping through the cracks, and that we don't have a vehicle that's out in Minnesota and it needs to be back here for its annual inspection, because getting that home can be kind of tricky if you haven't planned in advance on that. You can use your own employees to do your annual inspections, as long as they are qualified. In the next slide, we'll talk about what a qualified inspector is. I'm always a little cautious on that. If you have your own mechanic in your own maintenance shop, that is an acceptable thing, that you have a mechanic who's fully understands Part 393 and Appendix A. But if they don't know those pieces of the puzzle pretty clearly, I prefer you see the outsource that. Again, that's a personal decision that your company can make. But I know some companies where they'll bring in, I have a key employee who likes to fix up cars on the weekends, and we bring him in, he does our annuals on our vehicles. Always a little cautious on that, because you can get tripped up on a lot of the details and the DOT regulations. There's supposed to be a qualified inspector. And again, make sure your drivers know where all that information is, because it's amazing how many times you see people get stopped and they're cited for not having an annual inspection. And I talk to the owners, and we do an annual on every vehicle. I don't know why you didn't know where it was. So I said you can have your own people do your annual inspections. That is true. There's a whole bunch of requirements here, and I'll paraphrase this a little bit, but you can read this in Part 396.19. But it says basically your inspector has to be very knowledgeable in Parts 393 of the regulations and Appendix A. That again gets into the parts necessary for a safe motor vehicle, and then Appendix A is a lot of the out of service requirements. When does a tire become out of service? When does a windshield need to be replaced? Those are things that they should know really without having to do a lot of research back into it. They should be knowledgeable, know the methods and the tools. Again, I can probably tell you most of the things in Part 393 and Appendix A, but if you ask me to hook up a computer and do a diagnostic on a truck, I'd probably not know where to start. I don't think I'm ever going to be doing annual inspections on vehicles. Should be capable by experience, training, or again, somebody that's passed some type of certification, has at least a year of experience, or something that, again, you are knowledgeable in being able to take care of these trucks is really what that comes down to. There's other types of training there that are listed. Again, it's Potentially you could have been a state inspector as well. So there's other qualifications, but really the big chunk is that you know parts 393 and Appendix A, as well as really you have the ability to fix this truck should you need to. I think that's a short way of saying how your driver inspectors need to be. A lot of companies will outsource this just because it's a liability issue as well. If something does go wrong and you get cited for this, you at least have a piece of paper that says, hey, this vehicle was inspected by a third party on this date, and it does help in certain situations. Again, how do we prove that we have an annual? This was one of my clients I visited last summer. Looking at one of his trailers, we came across this annual sticker. It is there, and if I blow this up a lot, I can actually read February, and there's a date I can't quite read, of 2023. And you may or may not be able to see that on your computer at home, but on a large screen, I can see that. Honestly, I did not see that when I took the picture. I thought it was completely sun bleached or not there from the start. But this is a classic example of, when we're doing our daily inspections of our vehicles, you should take a peek at this. It doesn't have to be something you check daily, but at least once a month, take a peek at that sticker to see, is it still legible? If you don't have a legible sticker on your vehicle for a DOT, you can still have the paperwork in the glove box. But again, you need to know where that paperwork is so that you can prove that it passed a DOT annual inspection within the last year. So again, this is a common thing I see when I'm out on construction sites, especially on trailers, these are a lot of times on the tongue or somewhere where they're just getting blasted by the salt and by the sun. And it even tells you on there to use a permanent ink marker that won't fade in direct sunlight. And I think the manufacturer, this one hasn't figured out what to use because they seem to have faded pretty quickly. This was a June job site visit and February inspection. So within less than 6 months, you couldn't read the sticker anymore. Next one we're getting into is the pre-trip and the post-trip inspections. So we've done our annuals on all of our vehicles, but before our driver can get in this thing and drive away in the morning, they are supposed to do a few things. They're supposed to be satisfied that the motor vehicle is in safe operating condition. A morning pre-trip inspection is a good walk around, looking at the lights, the tires, are they leaking any fluids that could be a safety issue? Is there anything broken, bent, damaged, or falling off the vehicle? Those are things that we're checking to make sure that there's nothing that's going to create an issue when we drive away in this vehicle in the morning. It is probably one of the most important inspections, I think. If you're doing these regularly, these should prevent a lot of the citations that a company is able to receive for maintenance violations. But in addition to just the pre-trip, they're supposed to review the daily vehicle inspection report, which is the next one we're going to talk about, but they should review that from the day before if there was one done. It's not always a DVIR done on every vehicle every day. If there was one, that just typically means that there was some type of damage or defect found the night before. You're not supposed to be driving away on that until the mechanic has signed off that it either has been fixed or that it was not a safety concern that needs to be taken out of service. Again, that's where that mechanic should know parts 393 and Appendix A as well. There's a lot of things people turn in. My tires are getting bald, and they do measurement, and it comes back that it was, 4/10 on the rear tires, and 4/10 on the rear tires are actually acceptable to keep driving. Good that they noted it, but it is not something that needs to be taken out of service. The mechanic would sign that it doesn't need to be fixed. The employee under B here or the driver needs to check it then to make sure that the mechanic, he believes what he's telling him, right? If there was something that needed to be fixed, again, the driver should have signed that they recognize that it was fixed. The DVIRs is one that a lot of people get wrong. Don't know the exact date, but it was somewhere 20 years ago plus. A DVIR was a pre-trip inspection report. Pre-trip inspection reports are not required to be documented. They're required to do them. And if they're asked, did you do a pre-trip? Hope the answer to that is yes. The only way you can ever get a pre-trip inspection violation, there may be two actually, but the most common is the employee or the driver tells the trooper that they didn't do one. And the other way is, I guess, if you were leaving the yard and they noticed that you didn't do one as you were leaving, or you pulled onto the street and had a light out, they might ask you, did you even do a pre-trip? Because obviously you haven't had a chance to break this light yet and it's not working. But a pre-trip inspection does not need to be documented. A post-trip inspection is where you would typically see a DVIR completed. The DVIR is only done, though, or is only required to be documented if there is a deficiency. And that changed back in the probably mid to late 90s, I believe it was. I'm sorry, in the mid to late 2000s. It's been a while for a few years. So there are still a few companies that do DVIRs every day. There's not an issue with that. Sometimes I think it's a good idea to have some documentation. And one of the things I used to preach was we want to have somebody checking that box at the bottom here where it says condition of the above vehicle is satisfactory. It's about the third checkbox up on that form. Again, we like to have stuff that shows that your vehicle is safe. However, in theory, if we don't do a DVIR, it is a safe vehicle. So if there's anything that is noted on here, again, it is supposed to be corrected and made safe or declared safe before somebody takes this vehicle back out in the morning. So again, your procedure should be something that a mechanic has to identify and then also fix or decide it's not needed to be fixed. Couple things with your DVIRs. Again, you must keep those reports or certificate of repairs and any kind of certification of the driver's review for 3 months from the date reported. So if I made a note today that I needed new tires, tomorrow they put new tires on my vehicle. 3 months from tomorrow, assuming that I certified tomorrow that yes, they put new tires on my vehicle, I could throw those DVIRs out again. Right? So we don't need to keep a huge stack of these papers for the rest of my life. If you don't like doing papers, which I'm not a big fan of doing papers, there actually are apps out there that you can download. I've seen some free ones. I know some of the leasing companies have their own versions of them. The apps are nice because it immediately gets into somebody's hands. If I notice there's a problem, it flags it and it sends it to the mechanic, and the mechanic can look at it right on his phone and say, yes, this needs to be fixed. And then they can get this vehicle out of service quickly, or at least tell me, take my truck into the local tire shop or whatever it needs to be. As opposed to if I'm on the road for a month and I do a DVIR and a paper form, and I don't even get back to the shop until Friday afternoon with this thing, I've got 3 or 4 more days where I'm not going to get this even viewed. And that's a bigger issue. So again, the apps are kind of nice for that. That said, you can still do the paper copies, the triplicate forms if you really like paper. So if we just look, I just saw this one come across my desk a few weeks ago. This was a posting that I got. It talked about the top 5 violations that the federal motor carriers are seeing right now. Number 1 and number 2 are rated to your hours of service. Not what we're really talking about here today. Number 3 and number 5 are directly related, though, to your maintenance requirements. 3 would be an inoperable lamp, and I think I see that a little bit more frequently. So on my own personal accounts, I see the inoperable lamp as one of the most frequently cited violations. Number 5 is the operating a commercial motor vehicle without proof of that annual inspection. Again, I see that too much, and I know these companies are actually doing their annual inspection. So it has to be a miscommunication out there. Number 4 is operating without a CDL, which is something we talked about on the first of this webinar series. But again, a lot of violations, if you just look at that, the number 3 is the only one on that list that I can see when I'm driving down the road. If you're a state patrol person, you see a vehicle go by and it's missing a tail light, it doesn't take 30 years of experience to look at a vehicle with an inoperable tail light and say, there's a tail light there, it's probably missing and it should be working. You can get stopped for a lot of other violations because of missing lights. And that is one of the things I think is just the low-hanging fruit. If you can get a driver to at least do a walk around and check the lights on their vehicles before they leave the yard, your chances of being stopped decrease significantly. So I always tell people, check your DOT scores. This is the safety management system, and I've grayed out any information on these next couple slides that should give away who this is. but your DOT number has a record of every violation that your drivers have received. We're not really talking about unsafe driving, but that score can increase with speeding and other things, seatbelt violations. Maintenance gets into a lot of issues tied to what we're talking about here today. It's annual inspections, it's lights, it's brakes, it's tires. Load securement can be listed in this one as well. That number can go up pretty quickly on one inspection, because I can get stopped for speeding and then have 5 or 6 things wrong with my vehicle. And I go from having one inspection with nothing really on it to also one inspection with 5 violations and a couple out of service things. And you can see your maintenance score change pretty quickly. The raw score that you're looking at on the screen here, and again, anybody can go on to the Safety Management System website of the FMCSA and look up any company out there and see this information. So this information is not even private information that I'm showing. This is stuff that anybody can look up on any truck that you see go by you. All you need to do is search by name or by DOT number or their motor carrier number, and you can get to this screen. I can also click on it and see a lot more information on what's underneath there. You can see all the violations and where they were received and what they were received and the plate number of the vehicle. And you can do a lot of investigation into a company as to what's here. I will also tell you that from my days on the carrier side, this is things that a lot of insurance carriers are going to look at when they're trying to figure out if they want to insure you and how good a rates they want to give you. And you'll see an example in a little bit of a company that may have some issues when it comes to insurability on these things. So again, if you logged into this website, though, what you would see is actually your percentile rankings, because that number of a 10.72 under vehicle maintenance is a score that doesn't mean a whole lot. If you keep digging into this, though, we use a company called CAB, and it gives us a similar number to what you can see if you're logged into that safety management system with your DOT number. So again, you have the ability to log in and see all the information and your scores. What I can do is get into CAB and I can pull up your percentile rankings. So this is the same company, and their vehicle maintenance score is showing as an 84%. What that means is they are in the worst 16% in the nation for fleets of a similar size to them. That is not company you want to be with, right? You don't want to be anywhere above 50%. So the audit threshold for maintenance is actually 80%. So they are 4% above that 80 line. That means you are being flagged for an audit, right? You are being flagged if you pull into a scale. That yellow light that's on the traffic light there is exactly what the state patrol sees when they see your DOT number come across the scale. That means they're supposed to stop and do an inspection of your vehicle. You don't want to be in the yellow. You want to be in the green, and you want to be well below the 80% line. Technically, you could be at a 70 or 75% and not be above the audit threshold and have a green light. But again, that still means you're in the worst 30% of the nation, not someplace you want to be, right? Especially when you're trying to get acceptable auto rates right now. The other part of that is there's other things in this that will show up as warnings, if you will. So there's several asterisks here that they have. They're above average for their out of service rates. For their vehicles, they're 15% above the national average. So their vehicles are taken out of service a lot more than other vehicles are. They have one severe violation in the past 36 months. Again, I believe that was a brake one, but it might have been something else if I'm thinking of this company right. There's some other things. Again, it's saying that that recommendation inspection level is yellow. That goes to that traffic light up there. So again, if they have time to stop your vehicle, they're going to stop your vehicle because you're in the yellow. They're going to look for maintenance things because that's the category that's causing you to be in the yellow. So again, they're looking at this stuff. When you pull across the scale, that DOT number comes up. They have similar data here. You want to know when you're in the getting close to that number. For companies that we deal with, if I have looked at your, or Rick or I have looked at your fleets and we work with you on some DOT numbers, we put you in our CAB system and we actually give you a audit threshold that triggers well underneath the 65 and this 80% lines there, so that you have a chance to react to it. Right? It doesn't do any good to know when you went above 80, because chances are you're going to know, because you're going to be getting stopped more, or you may get a call from the state patrol saying that they want to do an intervention on this. We can kind of give you a little warning and work with you on these things as well, but you can log in and see this stuff as your own. So you can tell when you're getting close to those audit threshold lines. So again, if I keep digging into this particular company here, though, their 84 percentile score is not made up of 100 different violations. What they had was a few trucks that were inspected, and they had 5 that were inspected for brake violation, received brake violations, and 1 was taken out of service. They had 1 where they found a cracked frame on a truck, took them out of service. They had 2 for clearance lights, or cab marker lights, 2 for not having their emergency equipment, which we're going to talk about towards the end of this, 2 for not having their inspection reports done. And I know they do annual DOTs on these vehicles, 1 for other lighting and 1 for tires. If I just look at these things, I can maybe understand where my driver might not be a brake inspector and know everything about his brakes, but I have to think they would hear them squealing or recognize that they're not functioning properly. And maybe the frame I didn't realize was cracked. However, I would think you would start to feel it being a little loose depending on where the crack was on that vehicle, or you heard some different creaking or something. So really maybe only about 6 of the violations are things that the driver shouldn't have noticed first, right? So when we talk about who's supposed to notice these things, we can take 2/3 of these violations right here and get rid of them because our drivers are doing a better job on pre-trip and post-trip inspections. Yes, it's possible that you did a pre-trip and your lights were working and you hit a bump and took out a tail light. Realistically, I think a lot of the times it happens that they're just not doing their inspections on them. So some of the major violations that we see, tires, I'll just touch on these briefly here. Tires, if you look at a tire, the one on the very left is showing its tread pattern or the inner belts on this thing. Even the one on the center there, if you will, the outside dual, that one has got some bare spots on it. The one on the right, if you look at it, we do have a tread pattern on the left that is got some tread left on it. But again, if I measure your tread, it's on any of the major grooves, should be at least, and it's either 240 seconds or 430 seconds. If you have tires that are looking like this, it's telling me that they didn't do a very good job of doing their pre-trip that morning, because it's pretty hard to make your tires wear that much in one day. When do we take them out of service? Well, again, if we have belts showing, we have any kind of tread or sidewall separation, if it has any kind of a flat or an audible leak, it needs to be taken out of service. If it has a cut to the extent that I can see the inner plies or belt material, it needs to be taken out of service. Any tire on the front of the steer axles have to have 430 seconds tread. Any rears or other than the steer axles have to have 230 seconds of tread. If you don't have a tread measurer, you can use a penny and a quarter, and we can check to see that Lincoln's head is covering up his hair. If you can see the tip of his hair, it's not there, you're basically over 230 seconds. In your steer axles, again, it's 430 seconds to Washington's head. So again, kind of a low-tech way of doing it. You can go by a tire pressure or a tire depth gauge as well. Either work fine. But again, you can look at your tires and know that any of the major grooves are either under 230 seconds or 430 seconds, depending on which axle. Your lights is another one. It's, I think, probably the lowest hanging fruit of everything that the driver needs to look at in the morning. My rule of thumb is if your truck came with a light, assume that it has to be there and it has to work. And you may have added some other things to your truck. If you're a snowplow, you may have some yellow strobe lights. Again, those are not required for DOT purposes. But any of the lights that came on your truck, including some of the light things like number 10 here is your license plate light. That is one of the required bulbs that needs to be working on your truck. And I have had people ask, well, what if I'm only driving during the daylight hours? Do I even need any of these things? The answer to that is still yes. You need to have all the lights working on your truck, or you can be stopped and taken out of service for not having operable lights. If you have tail lights that seem to be taking a beating on your trucks because of the rough terrain that you're driving on, I suggest having a few spares in the cab with you so that you can replace these things quickly. And again, this is something easy that you can go through. Not going to spend a ton of time on this. If you really want to see all the different versions of this, you can go to part 393. 11, and you'll actually see these pictures and these charts that'll tell you which lights are required for something like a semi-tractor. There's more for dump trucks and other straight truck illustrations. Trailers, it'll tell you where you need to have reflectors, side marker lights, cab corner lights, all those type of things. It'll tell you which pieces need to be there. Even they call that a semi-trailer illustration. I don't believe that's a semi-trailer in my world, but that's what the DOT slideshow called it, I guess. But a smaller trailer, what lights you need to have in place there, right? And there are some older ones that didn't have some of the side marker reflectors on them. Again, you can buy those things at Walmart and add stickers to your vehicles. It's not that hard to do. Your safety equipment, again, there was 2 violations on that 84 percentile score for not having their safety equipment. Your safety equipment, the ones that I see the most, they either didn't have their warning devices, which is the bottom one there, and I use 3 directional triangles or bi-directional triangles. There are other things that you can have, including fusees, which I wasn't even sure I knew what that was, but it's a flare type of a device that can stick in the ground, or 3 burning flares. I put those in gray because, quite honestly, I'm not a big fan of having things that burn in your truck with you. I would rather see the directional triangles. It's safer, and it's they don't worry about them burning out and what the length is and whether they can light in the rain and other things. So again, you need to have warning devices. Should they break down, they can put them out behind their vehicle. You're supposed to have spare fuses, and again, at least 1 for each type or size of everything that's needed for your accessories. Again, you may have some things on your vehicle that are fuse protected, like a salt spreader or the amber strobe lights that you use for off-road or when you're in construction zones. Those are not necessarily DOT required things that you don't need a fuse for, but anything that you had to have a fuse for, such as all of the lights that we talked about, you need to have a spare for those types of equipment. Fire extinguisher needs to be at least 1 5 BC extinguisher. So you have to have one that's a little bit larger than your typical tiny extinguisher, although that's still a pretty small one. You can get by with 2 of the 4 BC extinguishers, or you can go to 1 10 BC if you have to have a placarded load. So if you're in the hazmat world, you need a 10 BC. Otherwise, the rest of us can get by with a 5 BC extinguisher in our truck. It has to be mounted, has to be charged, has to be annually inspected, and has to be ready to be used, essentially. So I can't have one that's all bent up because it was rolling around. It needs to be in a usable condition. You don't need one on a trailer and the truck. It needs to be one for the DOT vehicle. In that case, that's a combination. It needs to be accessible there. But you need to have a fire extinguisher, and the securement part of that can be an easy thing to get cited for. I've had people say they just leave them behind the seat, and it's propped up with other stuff back there. Not a big fan of that because, again, a state patrol person that wants to give an inspection or violation out can see that and say it's not not mounted, not secured. So that's the emergency equipment: fire extinguisher, fuses, and some type of warning devices. Can also suggest you make sure your company understands the load securement for the stuff that they're hauling. When you're dealing with things like lumber and pipe, it's based on length and weight. You need to have at least 1 strap for every 10 feet, plus 1 if it's not all the way up to the front of the bulkhead or the front of the truck, so that it has forward movement restricted by the front of the vehicle. So again, you could have a 12-foot piece of lumber. If it's not all the way up to the front, you would need 3 straps on that. So 2 in the first 10 feet, 1 for the second 10 feet, or the 2 feet in the back. So you would need at least 3 straps. If it's all the way up to the front of the cab, it would need 2 straps yet because it's still over 10 feet. Has to be at least 50% of the weight. So if I have 10,000 pounds worth of material on a trailer, I need to have enough straps or chains or load binders, whenever you're doing, to equal 50% of the total load. So 10,000, half of that would be 5,000 pounds. If I had 3 straps, you would need something more than a 1,500 pound strap, because that would only get me to 4,500 pounds. It needs to be at least 5,000 pounds for the total aggregate of all of the load securement devices. If you're hauling heavy equipment, be aware that anything over 10,000 pounds is considered heavy equipment. Anything with a hydraulic has to be lowered, not necessarily outriggers on a backhoe or something, but the bucket and the backhoe would need to be fully lowered. You would need to have a minimum of 4 tie downs to each of the 4 corners of the machine, all independently able to be secured and tied down and tightened. And if there is any kind of articulation, like an excavator, you need a 5th strap over the top of that. And it is sometimes possible to use the chains that are going to the front corners to go over the bucket of, say, a skid steer, where it's holding the bucket down as well. But again, any kind of hydraulics should be secured so that they can't bounce, lift, come loose, or swing off to the side. When I hear articulation, I hear swinging side to side or turning. State Patrol has told me in several presentations over the years that anything that moves, so like a skid steer bucket, can still come up and down. They consider that to be articulation. So just a couple things on closing here. Make sure that your drivers are doing their pre-trip and their post-trip inspections. Audit those things once in a while. Check to see, are they doing them? Are they spending any time on them? Do you see your driver's scores reflecting the fact that these vehicles are leaving your yard without getting an inspection? I know a few companies that will give the employees the first 15 minutes of the day to do a pre-trip inspection. So they're actually paying them to do these things and giving them time before they're allowed to get in the vehicle. Again, make sure you're getting your money's worth. The mirrors on the entrance is not something that's required here, but if you have a yard and you have those parabolic mirrors on your gate as you're leaving the yard and another one in the background, your drivers, as they're leaving, can flash the lights, turn on the hazards, and check basically all the lights around their vehicle without even getting out of the vehicle. It makes it harder for them to drive away without knowing that their lights are on. I will give them credit for that. I will also say that I think sometimes it's taking away their desire to get out and actually walk around the vehicle. And now you're going to miss things like your tires. So again, I think it's something, if you have a hard time getting your people to at least check their lights, that may be something that stops your vehicle from getting an inspection. But again, I think still the right answer is they need to get out and do a walk around their vehicles in the morning. Do you have a way to clear those DVIRs? I heard several drivers the other day talk about, we turn all these paperwork and I never seen anything come back on these. What happens to that paperwork once we turn in a DVIR? Well, again, if there's a violation on there or a deficiency that needed to be corrected, that needs to be followed up on, and the driver is supposed to make sure he sees that and signs off that it was corrected. So mechanic can sign the paper, put it back on his seat, and have a copy of that there for the driver to sign and put back in the mechanic's box the next day because you signed off that, and then they can file it away for you. I know a couple of companies out there that actually do spot checks of vehicles, and maybe they even pull a fuse out for the tail lights and check to see if the driver leaves the yard before he caught the fact that his taillights were out. Again, do you have to do that on every vehicle? No, but I think it is kind of fun to play with that once in a while. So I do my share of yard investigations too, where we'll sit in the yard and actually watch somebody hooking up trailers. Are they spending the time to go check to see if their lights are working, or they hook it up and get out of there so they get to the job site quickly? Again, they're supposed to do the pre-trip inspection on the trailer and the truck in the morning. So. The last one I had here is just a couple of things that I've heard are changing. So this was a little DOT update. I heard the State Patrol talking last week. There are some changes to the hours of service regulations coming that apparently passed through the changes to Trans 327. Trans 327 is the transportation order that Wisconsin uses to adopt most federal regulations, with a few of the exceptions, and some of those exceptions had to do with hours of service. One of the examples was the short haul exemption. In Wisconsin, or interstate, there was a 150 air mile radius rule that you could be a time card person if you were driving within that 150 air mile radius. The state of Wisconsin said that you had to start and stop your day within 12 hours. Federal regulations said you could start and stop your day within 14 hours. So again, if you weren't leaving the state of Wisconsin, you're technically supposed to stick to a 12-hour rule. My understanding is the state of Wisconsin is going to be adopting more similar federal regulations. One of those other regulations that they're adopting has to do with the ELD requirement, so the electronic logging device. Wisconsin currently does not have anything in the regulations that says if you're in the state of Wisconsin, you need to have an ELD. That's supposed to be changing in the near future here with this change. My understanding is it's coming and it was approved. It needs to be signed into law yet, was what I was told. I went looking for it. I don't see anything out on the internet. I haven't seen anything from the trucking associations that I belong to. State Patrol is the one that told me this right from the horse's mouth, if you will. So again, that should be coming. We're expecting sometime later in the year. Just keep an eye out for that because it could mean there's some changes to what you need to do as well. And then there's a couple of safety blitzes coming up this summer. May 14th through the 16th is the International Road Check Week. A lot more vehicle inspections get done that week. It's a good time to maybe take a look at your vehicles now, make sure the stickers are in place. Check your vehicles over. If I was on the road that week, I would want to make darn sure I was driving a vehicle that didn't have a light that was missing or tires that were bald, because again, very quick things for them to see. Operation Safe Driver Week is after the 4th of July there, and then Brake Safety Week is in August. So again, 2 other weeks where they do a lot more vehicle inspections and driver inspections. Just a good time for everybody to take a peek at that. So on that, I am going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can see if I'm going to stop sharing.
There we go. Thanks so much, Ken. I know I'm definitely going to be using that penny and quarter thing for my own tires, and I'm not managing a fleet. So as Ken said, we've got time for questions. We've got about 10 minutes here. So if you've got anything, you can hop it into chat or the Q&A. I've got both open. We'll just leave it open here for a second.
You're getting off easy.
You were too thorough, Ken. Every question has been answered. All right, I'm not seeing anything. If you think of anything after the webinar, we always include Ken's contact info in our thank you email. Then again, you will receive a copy of the presentation slides as well as a link to the recording. Thank you all so much for joining us